I was in the process of making another vlog when it suddenly hit me that I've never fully explained my love of the genre of horror. You'll see a few nods to the genre in my videos. Behind the escapades and over-the-top comedic tone, there's a certain aesthetic of gothic imagery. Add a few zombies, some H.P. Lovecraft references, and other cliches. That's because I like horror. Making videos on YouTube isn't my main occupation. I write horror stories. Bear in mind, none have been published yet. But I have submitted a few. I'm also trying to write a novel, and last year I finished writing a gruesome epic fantasy novella. Yeah, I'm a busy guy. And seeing that I haven't produced much content online this year because I've been concentrating on my writing, I figured why not do something Halloween related? Folks, I present to you a special edition of Aspie, Hyena, and why I love the horror genre. Horror can be political too. Just hear me out. I'm not sure if this was the intent of Irish playwright Bram Stoker when he wrote Dracula. But when I was an undergraduate at university, my tutors introduced me to new perspectives in analysing fiction. Not that I'm complaining, it's given me material for this vlog. In regards of political horror, Dracula's a perfect example of what we'll call for now right-wing horror. I'll explain this shortly. This late 19th century tome was first published when Great Britain was at the height of empire. It introduces a sinister Gothic villain from the East and on the boundaries of civilization. After all, vampires were a product of East European folklore, evoking a fear of death and unholy resurrection, or the undead rather, who arise from their graves to drink the blood of the living. Vampires are an Eastern myth, an unclean savage from beyond the grave, the other that must be conquered. Karl Marx would catch on to this legend as the perfect metaphor for capitalism. I'm no lefty, but he wasn't half wrong in some regards. I might be getting ahead of myself, but there's a bit of this in Blade, the Wesley Snipes film based on the Marvel Comics, where vampires are an Illuminati sect that controls the police and makes use of human familiars to enact their will during daylight. There's a bit of this with the character of Renfield, though he's mostly confined to a padded cell. Count Dracula, however, is a proud member of an ancient aristocratic warrior dynasty that fought the Turks during and after the Crusades. He is feared and loathed by the peasants of Transylvania, whom he rules through the shadows. The peasants are his livestock, as demonstrated when he feeds an infant child to his brides. In the book, the child's grieving mother enters the castle grounds pleading for his return. Dracula responds by summoning his children of the night, a pack of ravenous wolves, to silence her. In those regards, Dracula is a symbol of horror for the left. A blood-sucking parasite that drains the livelihoods of the populace. A predator feasting on the proles and stealing their children. An omnipresent entity that can control the elements. It's debatable whether it is Dracula himself who transports our hero, Jonathan Harker, by carriage up to the castle in the peaks of the Carpathians. After all, Dracula is a supernatural entity who breaks the laws of physics. How far his influence goes is left to the reader's imagination. According to John Carpenter, there are two types of horror, left-wing and right-wing horror. Right-wing horror is an external threat, a foreign entity, or the other. This is where we get alien invaders, or the masked boogeyman lurking outside, waiting to get in. After all, a vampire must be invited. We're under siege. We must board up the doors and windows, seal ourselves away from the outside world as it falls apart and is reclaimed by the living dead. Dracula represents the savage East that cannot be tamed or colonized, for he himself is colonizer. This is where we are introduced to Dr. Van Helsing, a man of faith who leads a band of crusaders to purge this foreign evil after it has crossed the sea and defiled the sanctity of womanhood. The distressed damsels, Lucy Westerner and Mina Harker, soon fall victim to the undead Count, who, in a way, offers them liberation from their sexually repressed lives. I am aware of how sexist this all sounds. I mean, this was Victorian London before women had the vote, so, you know. For Lucy, it is far too late. She has died and arisen beyond the grave, feasting on lost children. Hence, in Terence Fisher's 1958 Hammer horror version, she is quite graphically staked. Bloody hell! The men get it far easier in these movies, especially in the Hammer horror runs. I mean, they at least get staked off screen. Aside from Dracula, seriously, Christopher Lee's death scene is absolutely awesome. I guess the conservative status quo must be, conserved at the conclusion. On the opposite scale, left-wing horror is an internal threat that comes from within.
Your own body.
No point boarding up your doors and windows. The ghoul or boogeyman is inside the house. It is your dearest loved one, risen from the grave, having undergone a metamorphosis. Their body is no longer their own. Perhaps you are the monster. The change is happening inside of you. Your own body is no longer your own, but a vessel of evil that lives and breathes inside of you. Your flesh rebels against the mind, mutating and mutilating in equal form. Why are you hiding? It's not coming after you. You're already here! There's no stopping this evil! How can you call up a crusade against your own flesh and blood? In John Carpenter's The Thing, based on John W. Campbell's Who Goes There, a group of scientists at an Antarctic research station fall prey to a shape-shifting alien entity that assimilates its victims, taking their form. Who is the Thing? Which of these men are brave enough to lead a crusade against an enemy that is already among them? Tensions build as everyone begins to turn on each other. They elect a new leader, McReady, played by Kurt Russell, but unlike Van Helsing, he isn't universally respected or adhered. He takes the role of a modern-day witch-finder, seeking to hunt the other amongst his crew. He even kills a man who was still human. It can't be a coincidence that the name McReady is eerily familiar to a certain McCarthy, though I think Campbell uses the same name in his novella, which was first published in 1938. Mac condemns friends and colleagues, seemingly without fair trial, at one point threatening to blow everyone away with a flamethrower and a stick of dynamite. The infamous blood test is almost comical in how Lowe's, proven beyond doubt to still be human, automatically grabs a flamethrower in the next shot, aiming it at the poor sod they were tied next to just one scene earlier. There is no happy ending here. It ends with two survivors, Charles, played by Keith David, and Mac, sat opposite each other. The station destroyed, no rescue coming, neither one sure whether the other is the thing. You could debate whether the horror of The Thing is ultimately left or right-leaning. Is it a critique on McCarthyism or communism? Is it a deconstruction of American foreign policy? Or perhaps it's that the enemy is within the circle of close comrades to whom you can no longer trust or rely on. Fundamentally, body horror veers more towards the left. Think of The Evil Dead 2, where Bruce Campbell's hand gets possessed and tries to kill him. Otherwise, I don't think there's anything overtly political about it. Better example can be found in the Clive Barker short story, The Body Politic, where a man's hands seek freedom from the rest of the body, resulting in a revolution of mass mutilation. No comedic slapstick, or should I say splatstick, involved. In An American Werewolf in London, or the David Cronenberg remake of The Fly, the horror is an internal threat that comes from within your own body. Sure, there are external factors, like with another werewolf and a teleportation device, respectively, but the carnage that flows from a protagonist who is no longer in control of his own body to the point where their mental faculties are impaired, overtaken with an urge to kill. Sometimes left-wing horror is more than just body horror. It could be domestic, like the superflu unleashed on the American population by the military in Stephen King's epic The Stand. There's, of course, the sinister Randall Flagg and his cult-like influence upon the survivors. Reminds me of a certain charlatan making his second bid for the White House. Again, not really a foreign threat. Unless... In 28 Days Later, the threat originates inside an animal testing laboratory, the ensuing terror confined to mainland Britain. It's all but implied that the rage virus was genetically modified inside our own country. No foreign threat from the Far East or extraterrestrial menace from outer space, and it's easy to contract. One drop of blood in an exposed orifice, and you've got 10 to 15 seconds before you become a frenzied feral carrier, whose sole occupation of comprehension is to kill. It's far worse than anything in Romero's Living Dead saga, aside from, say, the Zack Snyder remake, which makes it 10 times worse by having zombies just as hard to kill and more contagious. Though that was a little too reliant on Danny Boyle's quote-unquote zombie thriller. Speaking of zombies, they can be foreign entities that originate from, say, a third world country. I'm thinking more along the lines of Zombie Flesh Eaters by Lucio Fulci, which takes Romero's Living Dead saga back to its voodoo origins. Otherwise, Romero's zombies are a product of science gone amok after a returning space probe is launched too close to Mars, or Venus, I can't remember, picking up radiation that reanimates the recently deceased, disregarding the supernatural by implying a scientific or science fiction origin. The exact cause is a little hazy, and ambiguity works better. We don't need to know the how or the why, just the what. As a filmmaker, Romero leaned more towards the left. In Night of the Living Dead, the lone survivor, an African American, is shot dead by a gang of rednecks who mistake him for a zombie. Apparently, Romero never meant to make a political statement on the racial fabric of America at the time, during the Civil Rights era. Dwayne Jones was hired because he was the best actor for the role. Either way, that ending rightly cements this movie's legacy. Dawn of the Dead, however, wears its racial politics on its sleeve. The first action sequence involves the police raiding a complex full of refugees and ethnic minorities. One cop goes crazy, mouthing off racial slurs whilst he blows a poor guy's head off, who we never find out was a zombie or not. Two cops desert their posts and join a helicopter pilot and his wife. They seek refuge inside a large shopping mall. First, they must clear the site of zombies. Afterwards, they sit back and indulge in petty consumerism to the point where they're absorbed in this pseudo-reality of normality. An imitation of civilization that is no longer there. Upon their arrival, the heroine asks her husband why there are so many zombies inside the mall.
What are they doing? Why do they come here?
It's a kind of instinct, memory, what they used to do. This was an important place in their lives.
Just as Dawn of the Dead veers more towards satire, a gang of bikers invade, forcing the survivors to face reality and defend their patch. Tom Savini plays a racist caricature that the African-American anti-hero must defeat. Flyboy succumbs to the false reality of consumerism, thinking of it as his property that must be defended to the death. He gets his wish. Side note, there's a brief reference to the voodoo origins of zombies when Ken Foree delivers his iconic line.
Voodoo. Granddad was a priest in Trinidad. Used to tell us, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
In contrast, alien invaders and/or assimilation narratives imply a certain right-leaning logic. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is such an easy metaphor for communism. Some may say it's all about thought crime, or political correctness, or cancel culture. Maybe it's the latest trend in Twitter, or whatever it's called now, where any deviation from the flow of accepted discourse is met with derision in the shape of this iconic meme where Donald Sutherland signals out Veronica Cartwright in Philip Kaufman's remake. Or is it the new McCarthyism where all of Donald Trump's opponents are part of a new world order of globalist paedophiles? Don't ask. Just Google QAnon and other useful idiots of the far right and you'll get a picture of what I'm talking about. Anyway, speaking of Veronica Cartwright, Alien, the Ridley Scott movie, is sort of a balance between the scales. It's a body horror, as graphically demonstrated when John Hurt lives up to his name in the infamous chest-burster scene. Remember, internal threat implies left-wing horror, but the word alien means foreign, strange, outsider, ergo right-wing horror. What of the ubiquitous company, which bankrolls the Nostromo crew, of whom Ian Holmes' devious science officer Ash sets up to become carriers, also that the company can make a profit from their lives using the alien as a bioweapon. This is lampshaded in the sequel when Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver, and the Marines catch the dastardly company man Burke, played by Paul Reiser, red-handed.
You know, Burke, I don't know which species is worse. You don't see them bucking each other over for a goddamn percentage.
Alright, we wasted.
Profit comes at the expense of the working class and the Marine Corps. Furthermore, James Cameron's sequel includes an action-oriented aesthetic that evokes a war movie, in an apparent commentary on America's humiliation in Vietnam. Bill Paxton's character, Private Hudson, perfectly captures the bravado and machismo of modern America. Then he turns into a blubbering idiot when he discovers just how screwed they are.
That's it, man. It's game over, man. It's game over.
I love Hudson. He's such a whiny little girl's blouse. He does grow a pair in the end when he saves Newt from the facehugger. Aliens is a balance in its political satire. The colonial marines are snidey and arrogant, but ultimately sympathetic. You feel bad when some of these characters get killed off. They function as a unit and are professional in their duties. Unfortunately, their mission is compromised by an inept commander and, as previously with the Nostromo, company interests. Even the army are at the mercy of capitalism. The alien itself is a symbol of corporate greed, or a metaphor for weapons of mass destruction. We can break the atom to build a bigger bomb, but the xenomorph has intelligence. It cannot be controlled or tamed. It sees us as prey to be exploited when we think we can exploit it. It is both other and us, imitating its host, physiologically speaking. They are a hive race, working like ants or wasps, a metaphor for communism perhaps, whilst also representing the interests of capital. There's also a more Freudian aesthetic, as empathised by H.R. Geiger's designs, but I'm going to have to explore that in the next video. I've run out of political discourse. I think I've explored it as far as I can, so I'm going to make another video about sex and sexuality of horror. Trust me, it'll be interesting, because there's so much more I can say about the Alien saga. Thanks very much for watching. Have a happy one.